we got this brand new piece of reporting from the Washington Post detailing exactly what was happening inside the FBI and the Justice Department ahead of last summer's search of Mar-a-Lago. And that reporting makes it clear that the FBI had, in fact, succumbed to some political pressure. But it wasn't pressure to investigate or damage Donald Trump. It was the opposite. FBI agents investigating the former president's retention of classified documents had been intimidated by Trump's relentless attacks over the years and basically cowed into operating with extreme caution. This is a quote from the piece. Justice Department prosecutors learned FBI agents were loath to conduct a surprise search. They heard from top FBI officials that some agents were simply afraid. They worried taking aggressive steps investigating Trump could blemish or even end their careers, according to some people with knowledge of the discussions. One official dubbed it the hangover of Crossfire Hurricane, a reference to the FBI investigation of Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. The FBI, the same FBI that certain Republicans have been attacking, was not chomping at the bit to raid Donald Trump's beach house mansion. Instead, the agency was proceeding exceedingly carefully, and they were worried about the political implications of provoking the former president. And all this resulted in very heated battles between the FBI and the Justice Department prosecutors, who were advocating a more aggressive strategy to try and retrieve those documents down at Mar-a-Lago. According to the Washington Post, it was only after a series of intense negotiations with Justice Department prosecutors that the FBI eventually moved forward with its search. And all along the way, in spite of all of the evidence to the contrary, the FBI continued to give Trump and his legal team the benefit of the doubt. The Washington Post reports that some FBI field agents wanted to shutter the criminal investigation altogether in early June, after Trump's legal team asserted a diligent search had been conducted. But according to the Washington Post, the Justice Department prosecutors continued to push for a search of Mar-a-Lago. Those prosecutors were ultimately vindicated when the eventual search in August recovered more than 100 classified documents, 18 of them top secret and some so secret that FBI and DOJ investigators didn't even have clearance to review them. So, how does this new behind-the-scenes reporting change what we know about this investigation and where it might be headed next? Joining us now is Devlin Barrett, national security and law enforcement reporter for The Washington Post. One of the bylines on this piece. Devlin, thanks for making the time. It is a bit of exhaustive reporting. And I kind of came away with it confused and enlightened. What is your takeaway from having investigated all of this in terms of the relationship with the DOJ and the FBI on the topic of the Trump Mar-a-Lago search?
So I think there's a couple ways to think about it. One is that it is very common for prosecutors and agents to argue during the course of an investigation about what exactly to do, how aggressive to go after witnesses, how aggressive to go after evidence. That happens in a lot of cases. There's tension points, there's flare-ups, they get resolved and they move forward. I think what's so different about the Trump investigation is really two things. Obviously, this is a very high-profile case. You know there's going to be a lot of attention paid to this. You know there's going to be a lot of, second guessing, both inside the government and outside the government. And two, I think, as you see in the discussions as we report them, there's a lot of tension and worry about making the wrong move. And for the FBI agents, that often meant worrying about what if we go too fast, too quickly, and make a mistake. And for the Justice Department prosecutors, the worry was often, we can't sit on this. We can't just wait and hope that the former president will do the right thing. And those two worries and those two types of concerns really were at odds sometimes.
Devlin, I guess one of the things I wonder what your final opinion on this is. On one hand, it seems like the FBI agents are reluctant to investigate to raid or search the Mar-a-Lago property because they're concerned about the optics. They're concerned about what's going to happen to their careers. They don't want to go in and raid a former president's home in jackets that say FBI. And then on the other hand, it seems like there's some legitimate belief that maybe Trump and his legal team are cooperating and that they have gotten everything they need. I mean, how much of this reluctance to search Mar-a-Lago was due to political pressure and how much of it was legitimate belief that actually we have everything we need?
So I think one thing to remember is the hangover of Crossfire Hurricane, and really the hangover of the FBI investigations of 2016 into Donald Trump and into Hillary Clinton just permeate this whole discussion. And I think it's important to remember that as much as there were political debates and political retribution, there were also genuine mistakes made in the course of those investigations that the FBI paid dearly for after the fact. And so I certainly don't discount the Justice Department concerns that too much of the FBI's caution was based on the idea of political blowback. But I also think you have to keep in mind that there were Inspector General reports that were sharply critical of how the FBI did past investigations of this type of profile. And so what you see in these back and forths and what our reporting shows is that there's a degree of really different approach. And so much so that back in May, even before the subpoena is sent for these documents, you know, some of the Justice Department officials want to do a search then, and the FBI thinks that's a bad idea, and then they get a little cooperation from the Trump side.
Right.
And the debate between the FBI and the Justice Department is how much is this full cooperation or is this only partial cooperation? And there again, you see a difference of opinion.
And then eventually they get the security camera footage that shows people moving boxes in and around Mar-a-Lago and think, oh, wait, maybe we don't have everything. But I mean,
and that's a huge piece of evidence. Yeah.
There's some reporting that you did at the end of last year, and I'll pull up the headline. Investigators see ego, not money, as Trump's motive on classified papers. Is it still your understanding that prosecutors believe Trump's motivating the reason he took these documents down to Mar-a-Lago was ego? And if so, how do you think that informs the way they feel about the search/raid at this point?
Right. So first of all, I think we need to be clear. When you say it was ego as the most likely motive here, that doesn't get Trump off the hook. Obviously, if you were doing something for purely financial purposes, I think most people would agree that's worse. But the bottom line as to how these documents are supposed to be handled is they are not to leave, you know, secure facilities and the government safeguards around them. So our understanding is that reporting is still right where it is, which is that these documents, these classified documents, seem to be jammed in with a bunch of stuff, and people don't seem to have been careful or thoughtful at all as to taking this volume of classified material out of government security, out of government custody. But a big part of this case is about what happens in the summer after the government formally demands this stuff back with a subpoena. And as you pointed out, there is security camera footage we have reported that shows people moving boxes of documents after the subpoena has been received. And that's a big red warning sign to prosecutors and agents. And both sides, for all the disagreements about this that may have existed at different times, both sides agree that security camera footage really changed their understanding of this case.
Right. It's just too bad that the timeline, because of all the internal arguments and, of course, a special master, pushed back the charging decisions on the parts of the prosecutors. And now we have a special counsel that is going to make that call for them.